Here we go with round 1. We won the die roll, so we're going to play first. I believe this is still a play first format, and our deck is very controlling, but wants to use its tempo to get into the stage of the game where we want to be. We have a Dimir Guild Kit in 3 planes, so we aren't able to cast Dimir Charm yet, but I like that we can cast almost any other card in our deck. We also have a turn 3 Hover Barrier and a turn 5 Steeple Rock, so things shouldn't be too bad. I'm not going to mulligan this hand. And then of course we start off with a Guild Gate. I'm going to be very interested to see what our opponents come up with in this DGR 8-4. Could be another deck that is trying to go for an extort plan. We can drop the Hover Barrier here, and I don't see a reason to keep up Dimir Charm. One thing that I don't like about dropping a Hover Barrier early is that it gives our opponent quite a lot of information about which of his creatures he can expect to do something or not. But it looks like our opponent is on a 4 or 5 color plan anyway, so it doesn't look like it's too important. And Hover Barrier is going to block that Armored Wolf Rider just fine. Let's just hope our opponent doesn't have the unflinching courage that we passed in the beginning. Here we can drop a Kingpin's Pet and extort, or just a Steeple Rock without extorting. Steeple Rock is going to deal more damage, but Kingpin's Pet of course gives us the option to keep extorting and have that as an additional win condition without being forced to attack. I think it's not completely unreasonable to drop Steeple Rock here as well if you think that you are more aggressive, or if you want to maybe double block with the Steeple Rock. Ogre Slumber also looks like a card that has gotten quite a lot better in the tri-set format. So now we have to be a lot more careful about creatures dying as a result. I would love to keep up Smite here, but getting the 3/1 First Strike into play has to be better. And if the Steeple Rock survives, then we might want to keep open Dimir Charm and Smite starting next turn. So here I'm just going to block. It's not like that losing a single creature and the Slumber triggering a single time is really that devastating. Okay, so we're losing the Hover Barrier to punish the enemy, 3 damage to a creature and to a player. So we are facing a single Death Touch red, but as I said, I think that's perfectly fine. And all the extortion that's going on should give us some more time here as well. I did say that we might want to keep open Smite and Dimir Charm starting next turn, but given that our opponent hasn't really shown us a way to deal with our flyers so far, I think it's probably a good idea to go on the offensive here. Scap Clan Giant fights with a random creature we control, so we are losing some of our creatures pretty quickly here. And the Steeple Rocks are going to try to take this game down now, with hopefully the backup of our spells. We are protected from potential sorcery speed removal on the rocks, which has to be more important than trying to deny him the draw step he just had. So I'm just going to hope that the rock survives. a late first guild gate also means that we don't really have to worry about any of the gatekeepers messing with what we're doing. We do have a nice option of smiting the slumlord here. And I'm just going to try that. The smite isn't really all that important right now, because if we aren't blocking, we are never smiting, so we can just do that now, getting the extort trigger. And we are threatening lethal more or less, not only in the air, but also by accumulating the extort triggers. So here we can now counter Angelic Edict, and that should be more than lethal. If our opponent has an Electrickery, then we are super dead, but I hope that's not the case. No, we did win the game here. That was a nice game. Our opponent had quite a lot of removal spots after dropping the Slumlord, but we didn't really have a lot of ways to go about things. I still think that blocking the 4/6 when it attacked was correct, and our opponent using his removal spell on our hover barrier was definitely better for us than him killing one of the steeple rocks that were absolutely vital in our success, for our success. Don't really see a lot of cards that I want to board in. We had these 4 here earlier on, and none of them seem particularly good against what he's doing. So I'm just going to try it with this setup again. It's interesting to note that we only have 2 islands in our deck, so it's actually not that easy for us to draw into blue sources if we don't happen to have one in our starting hand. I'm not going to mulligan here, and we are on the play, which is interesting. I said that I still think this is a play first format, but our opponent might disagree. And of course there are a lot of reasons why you would want to draw first. If you have a shaky mana base, you might want to draw first. And if you just think that the game is always going to be going long, then it's definitely correct to take the extra card. However, when you look at the start we are having here, it's pretty obvious that tempo is still hugely important in this format, and especially a card like Tithe Drinker. Every hit that we get in with Tithe Drinker might make it that much more difficult for our opponent to race us. Another reason to draw first is an abundance of removal or mass removal effects, but I don't think that we are going to be playing around any of that. So here we could Dimir Charm the Lobber Crew, which isn't completely unreasonable. On the other hand, Lobber Crew doesn't stop any of our flyers, and we have a very nice curve that we can play. Now, dropping Rune Ring and then Steeple Rock is quite a lot worse considering that we aren't extorting. So even though Tithe Drinker might be stopped next turn, we do deal 2 additional damage this turn, and we get to extort more often in the process. So I'm going to just get rid of that Lobber Crew, hopefully pressuring our opponent so that he can't play out the cards in his hand as he would like to. And of course potentially just threatening to extort him out of the game without even considering what our flyers are doing. Warrior's Helix is a nice way for him to gain back some life, but it does mean that we are somewhat validated in our decision to kill the Lobber Crew, because Tithe Drinker is already getting in a second time. So Skymark Rock is able to bounce defending creatures with toughness 2 or less. So had he had our opponent played one of these, we could have bounced it, but it didn't really happen that way. So Angelic Edict took out Skymark Rock, F6, so that went pretty quickly. And this turn is interesting because if we drop the Rune Ring, we make it more difficult for our opponent to do. Well, if he has a removal spell, then he doesn't really have a good target, because Tithe Drinker is a threat, but not a threat that he wants to use removal on. He wants to dominate it with some ground creature, and if he has another removal spell, he would love to kill the Steeple Rock, but killing Rune Ring is kind of awkward, and we do lose out on 1 damage potentially, but if we draw a land, then we also get to Extort off Steeple Rock, so not really too concerned that the creature we are playing here is missing 1 point of power, because I hope that this play is just putting our opponent into a tougher spot. Let's just assume that he has the creature that shoots 1 at random, then we wouldn't have offered up our Steeple Rock here. Our opponent is finally going to have a way to block the Tithe Drinker, which took him long enough, so I have a feeling we might just have him dead here very, very quickly with the help of Tithe Drinker. Now Steeple Rock and Rune Ring combine for 5 damage, bringing our opponent down to 3, which would mean that playing Dimir Keyrune and extorting means that the Keyrune is lethal. Alternatively, we can Hussar Patrol, but we don't really see a way through with our ground creatures at this point. One more thing that we could do is play the Keyrune, extort, and then use the extra mana to extort off Steeple Rock, but the additional pressure here is much more important than extorting. One great thing about Extort, which was true in Gatecrash as well, is the fact that your high life total basically means that you're unkillable, or unraceable if you want. So here we basically never have to be afraid of being raced by what he's doing, and we can focus on just killing him quite easily. So Trestlethrower gets Death Touch from Mace Abomination, so I'm not really keen on attacking into it with my creatures, at least not at this point. We would be dealing 2 damage at the cost of a 3/1 flyer, and somehow that can't be correct. So we are going to extort here and then just pass the turn. At some point we might want to cash in the Rune Ring for a card. But I'm hoping to draw another flyer, then maybe we can attack with all flyers to deal the last points of damage. Otherwise we're just going to attack with the Keyrune and then see how that goes. Land isn't too bad because it means we can extort off of the Hussar Patrol. And then attacking with everything is still not out of the question next turn. Yeah, opponent cashes in the Cluestone as expected. He really needs a lot of things here. First of all, probably needs to deal with the Keyrune, but then the Tithe Drinker is still a huge threat. Which is also the reason why I'm just playing out everything. The fact that I get an extra trigger off of every spell means that I have no incentive to hold back anything. At this point we have an interesting decision to make. We can attack with all of our creatures and have him dead almost assuredly. Or we could just attack with the key rune and the 2 flyers, and then he lives if he has a removal spell for one of our flyers. Now the problem with attacking with the ground creatures as well is that if he actually has a way to deal with 2 creatures, then we also lose our extort creature, which is something that he has to deal with by itself, because if we draw a single spell, then he's dead. So I'm going to go for the kill here with the flyers, but not with the ground creatures. And that means if he has a single removal spell, he lives, but he's also using it on something that we don't need to win the game. We are still threatening lethal with both Tithe Drinker and Dimir Keyrune. Okay, 4 damage to us isn't really the way to go here, I think. Yeah, it looks like that Boros Charm did really help him there. It's an okay card, but not really something that's great against our deck. And also a card that I like much better in aggressive decks. Okay, that went well, and we'll see if we can win the semifinals as well.